So today we're going to be talking about null objects. Again, my name is Hannah Oppenheimer. You can find me on Twitter with that handle. You can ask questions at any point or save them for the end. I have no preference. And just as a reminder, I just started learning Ruby last year, so I have no idea what I'm doing, but hopefully this talk will help you solve one of many Ruby problems.
And maybe just zoom in like one.
Sure. So Reveal.js doesn't always zoom in well, but if you feel like something's off the screen and I don't notice, just let me know. So prior to implementing null objects, we use conditionals. In object-oriented programming, when you want to invoke a method on an object that may be nil, you have to first check that the object is not nil and then call the method. So this is an example. If the object is nil, do this. Otherwise, do that on this object. It's pretty common lines of code that we see pretty often. So what's wrong with this? Quality Ruby favors duck typing, which for a long time I was picturing ducks typing, and that is actually not what it is. It's establishing the suitability of an object for a certain purpose based on the presence of methods assigned to that object, not based on the type of that object. So we're talking about typing here. And that doesn't mean typing with your hands, talking about the types of objects. It also removes conditional logic from the view, favoring business logic in the models. So this is where null objects come in. A null object, just by definition outside of Ruby, it's used in other programming languages, is an object with a defined neutral behavior. So instead of using a null reference, you can use a null object that looks like a real object but has empty method bodies. So for an example, I love dogs, as you could see from the original GIF on this presentation. So we're going to use a dog example throughout this presentation. If a dog is nil, there's peace and quiet, otherwise called bark on the dog. Just an example. So let's get started with using null objects. So we start all of our code writing with writing tests. So in this test, we've created a dog named Fido, and we expect that Fido's bark would be equal to a string of woof. In the controller, we would have a method called show, where you would basically call dog.new and give that an instance, name that as an instance variable called dog. In the models for users, so let's say users have dogs, the definition of the dog method is either a dog that exists or a null dog. So these two models, the dog that actually exists, the real dog, versus the null dog. So in the class dog, we initialize that class with a name, such as Fido, and its bark is a string of woof. Whereas in the null dog, we just have a method called bark, and there's nothing in it. So they look very similar and act very similar, but null dog obviously will return nothing. So where this actually comes into play is when you are in your view, instead of having a conditional statement of, if a user has a dog, show the dog. So this line in the view would replace that. Render user.dog. So the way this works is that in the real dog model, we use something called toPartial path. And in this real dog model, we've defined the toPartial path as \dog, where you can see \dog HTML has a list of reasons why I love my dog. He cuddles, walking is fun, and he makes the sound dog.bark. So if you called dog.bark and you didn't have a null object, this would present an error because there is no dog to call that method on. However, using the null object, null dog, we have a class null dog with a defined method bark, and it has a two-partial path of null dog, which leads to the null dog HTML file that says please adopt dog, and it doesn't call the bark method on it.